Alright, good morning everybody. So today we're going to be working with our I/O panel. Again, I want to remind you to take screenshots as we go along with this and make sure you keep paying attention to what we're working on. We're going to start off with looking at the iopanel.java file. So if you want to pull it up on your screen as well and put your notes up for that. We've added some information right here inside our setup listers method. Again, we're using our setup listers method so we can have that information easily available so we can work on our project and keep our methods clean and easy to find. Now, I've done my basic setup for a regular listener for the save button. As you can see, we create an action listener object with the action perform method inside that. And we have the game temp game is equal to base controller.make game from input, passing to the text fields from the title, rank, and rules area. And so this is a method that is obviously existing inside base controller, which we'll be talking about in just a bit. So don't worry that you don't have that code written yet if it gives any errors. But then we check, again, as I said, since we're passing information from thing to thing, we have to make sure we check for null. And so I put that check right there. If temp game is not equal to null, I will say that base controller.saveGameInformation, and I'll pass that temp game. Again, when we are passing information back and forth, and we have a default option of a null object inside a method, we need to make sure we check for that. And so that's why we've got that line right here. Again, make sure that's in your notes, that when you are passing objects or creating objects inside a method, you want to make sure that you check for null. That way we can avoid a null pointer exception, which will crash our system and make it burn. If there is a null object that is created, I do put a little information right there to say try again with a valid number, because that is generally the problem that prevents the creation of a number, since we have those objects that we are working with already. So we have this set right here. Go ahead and make sure you have this method screenshotted. Again, we'll do a capture on that later. And so that's the only thing we've added to our I/O panel. Our I/O panel is still quite boring. Okay, so moving back, we want to go ahead and look at our I/O controller. Again, our controller is where our work is going to happen. And so let's go ahead and take a look at what we did last time in class. We're going to review that really fast because it does tie in directly with what we're going to be using today and how we're going to be developing our code today. So the first thing we have, again, is we have that save file that we create a file name. Our current save file is a new file that we do not access. Notice again, that just creates the file with that file name. There is no reference to it at this point, so it doesn't need to be inside a try block. We create a scanner for reading that file. We set a game equal to null, again requiring us to check to make sure that we check for null when we use this. Then we have our game ranking or game title and array list for our rules that we read information into. Notice again how all of these are blank because we're using a method. Variables need to be blank or have a default value attached to them because otherwise they will all be an empty value inside a method. Our try block right here, we go ahead and we try and read that file. We read each line, storing it into the game title, reading the next int into the game ranking, and then as long as there's something left, we will read that into the game rules as a array list of strings for each line. And then we have our current game as a new game, passing that information, and we close our reader. And again, we check to make sure that file exists with that catch statement. So using that quick little review of what we did inside our controller to save a file, but we haven't tested it out yet, to read a file. We're going to be testing that out though today, as I said. Now, this is the method we just called a moment ago. And so please take a look at this, make sure you screenshot it, and then we'll work on typing it in later. We have the public game method. It's public because this is seen outside of the class. It's outside of the package, so protected also won't work. This needs to be seen in a different package entirely, the view package, so it must be a public method. And so we have a game, current game as a new game with nothing inside it. It's just a blank game. And then we say current game.set game title. We pass it the game title from that parameter list right here. Now, we then have another method right here, checkNumberFormat, passing it game ranking. This is where we have to check our user input. What we need to make sure we're doing is we have to check to make sure that our number can actually be turned into a number because our game ranking is a 1 through n number. So we have to make sure that it will fit that. So I've made a method called checkNumberFormat. And as you can see right here, it is a Boolean method. And I should actually make this one private because I did change this one earlier. And our private Boolean checkNumberFormat passes it a string. we want to make sure that we can take that string and convert it into a number. And so we're going to try, inside a try block, again, something we've been using now for a bit. And we're going to check a valid, is valid, or int valid, and is equal to integer.parseInt, passing it to be parsed. We've done that method before, but we just let it give us an error if it wasn't a valid number. Since we are trying to have a more complex, more powerful program this time, we want to make sure that we check that this is actually a number that can be, a string that can be converted into a number. And so we are going to try it first, and then if we catch a number format exception, aka we have got something that can't be converted into a number, then we're going to give a lovely error saying, hey, please try again with an actual number. And so if we actually screw this up, this error will be happening twice. Once right here when it checks it, and then again when it comes back saying that we have a null object for our game because something had happened with our game creation. So again, this is going to give us a nice little warning twice, because first time right here when it actually checks the number, if the number is not correct, and then again when we can't create an object because of that. So this checkNumberFormat, this is a great one to screenshot. And again, put comments on there. We're having just this is number is false because we're assuming at first that it is not a correct number. We then check to see if we can convert it to a number. If we can convert it to a number, we set is number to be true. If it fails because that try block has got a problem, we then do a pop-up message, and is number will still be false. So we go back up here. That would return true. If it does return true, then I do my fun ranking. I parse that back into and I shove it into my fun ranking for that. Otherwise, at this point, like I said, I return null because if we can't create that object, we have to have an error message go back to our system. Now, we are converting a string array into an array list for these next couple of lines. We decided that our rules were going to be an array list object because our rules could change. They might have more rules, there might be less rules. And because those rules can change in the quantity of them, we decided that array list would be a better option. But the .split method that we've already used will only return an array. And so we need to go through and take the contents of that array and put it into an array list. And so we say string array temp is equal to gameRules.split, passing it \n, which means every time we press the enter key inside our text field, it will be a new line. So it'll split each line there on that. And then we'll say array list string temporals is a new array list of strings. We'll loop over using a for each loop. And we'll go ahead and do temporals.add, that temporary word that is inside that temp array. So we're using the for each loop because it will do it for every single thing on there automatically. And then we will, once we've gone through that, we'll do our current game, set the game rules, that new array list now of rules that we just created. And that will then return our current game. So this creates a game object from input. And again, we're having this happen inside our controller class, our controller package, because the view is designed to show information. We will send information to the controller, process information in the controller, and then we can send information back to the view or use the model as needed. But the controller is that heavy lifter. So we have this public method that uses a private helper method, and so we'll be adding some documentation to that later today as well. And so that makes a game from the input. Going back to our I/O panel, where we just were, we have that make game from input. That creates a game. We call it temp game. Again, we need to check to make sure that the game is not null, because we return that null value if something's screwed up. So we check to make sure that we are not null. As long as we are not null, we will then call our save game information method that we've already written. If the game is null, we pop back out, we go to our else block, and we say that, hey, try again with a valid number. So we can actually have that event happen. Let's go take a look at our save game information method again, that last bit in controller, before we move on. Here's our save game information method. Again, we did this last week, actually, on Friday. So it's a public method. Again, it's public. Why? Why is it public? Other classes, and specifically inside other packages. If something needs to be seen across a package, it has to be public. That keyword protected, the one that we've seen a couple times but we haven't used, that can be seen inside the package. But we're sending information across packages, and because of that, we need to make sure we tell that it's public. Okay, so we have our print writer. A print writer is a stream writer. It's a way of writing specifically text to a file. We gave a file name, and again, notice how there is no path attached to that file name. That file path is right there in the directory of our project. If you do not specify a path for your file, it goes to your project folder. And then in that try block, I try and write that title as a line. I write the game ranking as a line. And then I do for count 0 through getRules.size. I count going up by 1 each time. I write as a line that current rule. And then I close my stream, and then I would catch any exceptions that go along with this. So let's take a look at our code where we are right now. I'm going to go ahead and play this. You guys may not be here quite yet, and that's okay. Like I said, we're not worrying about that right now. And here is my I/O project, my lovely screen of code. My game title. We had hopscotch, was one of the ones we were talking about last time. Hopscotch. Game ranking. On a scale of 1 to 10, how fun is hopscotch? 2. What are the rules of hopscotch? A rock. Jump to number spot. Pick up rock. Reverse jump back. We're going to click on Save the Game Stuff. Didn't crash. There was no error. I'm going to go over here to my Package Explorer and notice how in my I/O project I now have a savefile.txt. I double click on it to open it up. Hopscotch. 2. Throw rock. Jump to number spot. Pick up rock. Reverse jump back. Repeat. Is that what I just typed in? Okay, so we have successfully saved to a file with this code. We don't have a button right now for reading from the file, but we have a method to do that. So we're going to throw one together really fast. And I'm going to go to my I/O panel again. And after here, Save button. And then inside my Setup panel, I'm going to add that button. So I'm adding a little bit of code just for that. That adds the load button. I'll go to my design window really quickly. And I'm going to drag over a spot for that lovely load button. Oh, I've got a couple constraints to move around. No big deal. Grab those constraints, dump them into my setup layout method, just like normal. Save that. But now I'm going to go into my setup listeners, and I will add a listener for my load button. So load button dot add action listener. It's a new action listener. And the method is action performed, and I add an action event. And what kind of action event does a button have? A click. And so now, what I'm going to do is we are going to actually have to check for loading that up. So we will need to create a game based on calling a method from our controller, and then from that game, we will need to parse those objects into the appropriate fields. So we'll make a game, temp game, equals base controller, dot read game information. And that goes and reads the game information from the save file. And then test to make sure that is not null, because again, since that's using a try catch, I have to make sure that my properties are valid. So if, and then inside my parens, temp game is not equal to null. And inside this, I'll just do a quick joption pane.show message dialog. And just do a quick little thing like that. And if it is in order, then I'm just going to take the information and pass it to all those fields. So if the game is not null, I'm going to say that the title field dot get set text is going to be temp game dot get game title. Craziness. My ranking field dot set text will be the temp game dot get fun ranking. Oh noes, set text, that's an int. I have to tell it to do it as a set text takes what kind of variable? A string. So I need to convert this to a string, so it's going to be integer dot toString, and I will pass it the fun ranking. So I'm going to take that string, make sure it's valid, and throw it in there as a text to that. And then I will do my rules area. Oh no, I can't put my array straight into the text of that. What do I need to do for an array to put it to text? There's something we have to do with an array. If I just try and print it, it just gives me the gobbledygook, the address stuff inside the JVM. How do I print the parts of an array? What's the tool I use? A loop! Very good! So instead of doing this, I need to go through and create a string and dump all the stuff in there into a loop. So we'll say string temp equals blank. And then we are going to say a loop for parens. And we will do string current rule colon temp game dot get game rules. So for every string inside that array list, we're going to say that temp plus equals current rule plus quotes \n. And then I will say that my rules area dot set text, and I will pass that temp. So that's going to go through. If my game is not null, I'm going to set the text of my title field. I'm going to set the text of my ranking field. And then I'm going to set the rules into a string and set those rules then into the text field. And to make this even more appropriate, we'll say that is going to be temp rules. Just to make our code a little bit cleaner. And there's a shortcut for that. Does anyone remember what the shortcut is to rename something? It's to refactor and then rename. Exactly. That will make things go a little bit faster. That's a good thing to do when you're trying to actually get some stuff done at once, especially if you use the same variable multiple times. Only 3. I did that fairly quick. So let's go ahead and let's try this. Let's go take a look at our method again for reading the code. reviewing that really fast. We're going to read that game information. So our read game information gets the file, checks to make sure that the file is in there, gets all those pieces set up. It then reads the next line for the title, the next int for the ranking, and as long as there's next, it adds the next line to game rules as a item in an array list. Another reason why we are using array list versus array, we don't know how many lines will be there, and so we have that while loop because while is good for undefined length. Since we don't know how long it's going to take, we can't really make an array because we have no idea how many lines it'll take to finish the end. We then create that game, we close the file, and we give that does not exist message if it doesn't work. Let's give that a try. So we'll play this up. Our I/O controller will run. And I'm going to hit load the game stuff. My file is still there, right? Hopscotch 2, blank line. I see a blank line. Do you guys see a blank line? So we have read that in there. It did read the game stuff. Should we add a new game? Let's see. What's another? Jump rope is a good game, right? Double Dutch? Double Dutch. I'd say Double Dutch is more fun than hopscotch. I'd say at least a 6. It's harder at the very least. And let's see, what are the rules for Double Dutch? 2 people spinning 2 ropes. 1 person, alternate directions. 1 person jumps in, continues jumping over both ropes. Okay, does that sound right? Let's save this. Let's make sure it's saved in there. So I'm going to go back over here to my project, save file.txt. I have to refresh my file. Oops. Right click, refresh, double click. What? Where'd hopscotch go? I overwrote my file. I lost it all. All that work, all that hopscotch time is gone. What am I going to do? I have that println, and it just writes it all over. It just writes over the file. But guess what? We can actually write to the end of the file. And then we'll run into a different problem. Yay! Well, how many lines will this, what will happen if I read, how many games will I read at once with that read game information? So it'll read the title of 1, the ranking of 1, and then everything else will be an array list as the rules of the of that one game. And so we're into that problem. This is why reading a text file may not be the best way to do this. But we're going to successfully get this to work and make sure we can do this over and over again. So, we'll hit that in just a second. But first, let's look at our code. So our read game information. If you notice right there, we went after we read the number of that and we loaded it back up, there was a blank line that went in. And that comes from the next int reading. It has basically, there's another blank line of text after an int we must escape out of. And we'll deal with that in just a bit. but we've got that basic structure. So we have now a method, and let's check to make sure our error catching works. So I've got this running right now. I'm going to type in 6. This is clearly not a numeral, right? I'm going to hit save. Please try again with an actual number. Try again with a valid number. And I would not be able to load that back up from there. So let's take a look again at that structure. Try it with our older game, the hopscotch version. 12. We'll give hopscotch a really great rank. Please try again with an actual number. Try again with a valid number. So typing in text that is not an error, or that is not a number, causes that catch to happen. We have that numeric format exception, which prevents our system from crashing, because if I did not catch that, it would simply just give us a numeric format exception and crash our program. So let's take a look at our code again, see how that is set back up. So we make game from input. We take a title, a string ranking, and a string rules, and we then check that number format right here, which returns null if it's incorrect, and also gives us that lovely little error message saying that it did not work. Try again with an actual number, and we'd probably give that a better value for the ranking. Make that a little bit cleaner. Okay. Any questions on what we did code-wise with this project? Does it make a fair amount of sense? Okay, is there anything you want me to review with you before I give you guys some time to work on this as individuals? Okay, so going over that really fast, if I take a look at my structure now, I have my save file. My save file will write to the hard drive and read from the hard drive. I have a problem with my current structure though, because my current structure will only read one single object into it, and then everything else is then part of that original object. So we're going to have to find a better way to save those files. And we'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, our file panel, we have inside that, that's actually this bad code, that was just temp code. Excuse me, our I/O panel, we've created 2 listeners. We use the standard basic setup on that, but we have to check for null. We check for null because we are using other classes and other methods to create objects, and they throw a null object out if there is a problem. And so we have to test for null inside this method to prevent a problem. So we always have to check for null, otherwise we'll get null pointer exceptions. We use right here inside I/O panel. Why am I using null inside the action performed instead of this? Because we were using this inside of other things. But if you notice the I/O panel, what is this inside? What object is it in right now? I'm inside an action listener. And the action listener is not an object that can have a pop-up window. If I had a reference to my own, if I could do a reference to the app frame if I wanted to, but because I don't have a reference to my I/O panel inside itself, this one has to have a reference to null when I use the show option pane show message dialog. Question? That's it.
I was wondering why I missed the Alice.
Okay. My load button listener, I create a game object based on the readGameInformation method that we made yesterday. I check to make sure it's not null. If it is not null, I then set the text from those components. Remember right here, I have to use the integer.toString because I can only use a string as a parameter for set text. Even though we can print numbers as strings, you can't convert them implicitly. You must explicitly call the integer.toString. And if I just printed the temp rules variable, we would not be able to actually get the value that is inside the current rules. We have to actually loop over the rules because they are an array list. Because you can't print an array list on itself, you have to loop over the array list and then dump that text into a string. I use the \n to give each of them a new line, and then I set the text inside there.